There's a fascinating conversation between Jordan Peterson and Russell Brand asking if we're facing an apocalypse and what that has to do with the state of our soul, and how do we encourage people to pick up the cross.
Notion that you're to hoist the cross of...
Or pick up the cross, or pick up...
The cross answers all their massive questions. Obviously, neither Russell Brand or Jordan Peterson pretend to be Catholic or teaching the Catholic faith, but I have a lot of respect for both of them because they're searching for truth and they are courageous.
Now, when you talk about the hedonic as a transcendent and mobilizing force, I'm reminded of Blake's famous edict, it's the road of excess that leads to the palace of wisdom, perhaps because in some kind of my cup runneth over type way. In true ecstasy, you might burst the bounds of the self and discover the transcendent through ecstasy, although personally I've discovered that's a dangerous route to ecstasy.
Russell Brand is quite right that it is very dangerous to think you can find wisdom in excess. This line of William Blake, that the road of excess leads to the palace of wisdom, where did he get it? In fact, one of the darkest things in the world is what produced it. It's from Kabbalah. Here is a paper from Marcia Suchard, a Jewish academic, and she traces William Blake's views that we have to overturn the Ten Commandments and through sensual enjoyment we'll find wisdom, back to the false messiahs of Jacob Frank in the 18th century and before him Sabbatai Zevi in the 17th century. And it's hard to say how evil this is. Kabbalah is about turning truth on its head, about swapping good and evil around, and imagining that by sexual perversion on earth we can somehow bring order in heaven, and that by bringing on calamities on earth, disasters, we can somehow bring about redemption. And Suchard explains how these ideas came to William Blake. She writes that the long-suppressed esoteric underground in London, which received Jewish and Masonic emissaries from Poland and other Eastern European nations, who infused their antinomian beliefs to European elites, with whom, for example, William Blake was in touch. She names Count Nicholas Ludwig von Zinzendorf and Baron Emanuel Swedenborg. So you have a count and a baron here. They're influential. The first is a so-called bishop of the heretical Moravian Brethren, and the second is a demon-inspired pluralist theologian trying to work toward a one-world religion very remotely. With Blake, all three of them are social justice warriors trying to bring heaven on earth, and yet they are at enmity with the sacrifice of Jesus Christ in Holy Mass. The dark satanic mills in Blake's Jerusalem might well refer to churches. He couldn't say everything openly, but the Kabbalists will understand what he's saying. They will liken Jesus to Satan, and they go after the devil for leadership. So when you hear William Blake's poetry put to rousing music by Hubert Parry, which has had massive cultural influence in England, he uses a lot of Old Testament imagery. This is the Jewish influence, and asks about building Jerusalem in England's green and present land. But it's the wrong Jerusalem. We're not talking about the heavenly Jerusalem. We're talking about a false messianism here, about getting behind the globalist project. The emerging one world order we see today has very long roots. And Jordan Peterson has something interesting to say about the danger of this search for truth through ecstasy. And God can give ecstasies in contemplation, but not through any physical stimulation.
It's also the case that if you do throw yourself into the palace of pleasure, let's say, and allow your hedonistic excesses to make themselves manifest, you can also start to understand exactly how abusive and psychopathic you can become in that pursuit. And that's a form of transcendent realization too. Yeah. And maybe there's no way of coming, like, I don't know if you can understand the human proclivity for evil until you've been in a situation where your own ability to manipulate and act in a, what would you call, instrumental, radically instrumental manner actually had free reign.
There are people who have given themselves over to Satan, and this chaos in their soul then becomes a problem for the whole world. If 95% of the people in the world live in a peaceful and orderly way, 5% can still cause destruction and chaos. This isn't as bad as it sounds. It doesn't mean we're at their mercy. It means that we have a massive struggle for perfection, and God is with us. He will have his victory. So although the demonic might be very few in number, they're powerful, and they're trying to write a script for the world which is sucking many people in.
For evil, because you have been, as you said earlier, molecularized by a culture that wants you atomized and discharged and passive and functioning merely as a consumer, thinking the thoughts of their yesterday. No longer an actor in your own life, merely an agent in their lives, reading their script. When you were talking about the spirit of communism being some unfolding entity that can replicate itself, I thought of some other synonyms that might be applicable, like virus and like fractalism. As if impacted within the individual is the potential for the whole, that it can self-replicate, that there is a sort of berserk wisdom that can be unleashed in the world.
Communism is a kind of false messianism. If we don't follow Jesus Christ as Messiah, people will look for false alternatives. Communism was one of them, and as Russell Brand says, it's kind of like a berserk wisdom which replicates. Actually, it has come in Gnosticism and Arianism. It's the voice of the Zohar. It is absolutely irrational, false. We have nothing to fear from this evil. God is within us. His kingdom is within us. We find him there through recognizing our own sinfulness and our absolute dependence on him, on his grace, his mercy. And if we will let him clean up our soul, then we will share in his victory in the world and in eternity.
Part of the reason that modern man can't find God is because, well, he's looking in the wrong places, that's for sure. But Jung also said that, modern people wouldn't look low enough. Maybe you discover God in the radical realization of your own insufficiency and sinfulness. That's a classic idea. And I also think that's true.
Yeah.
I think that is the case. I became convinced of the religious substrate of existence, mostly from studying evil, not from studying good.
Now, it's true that the manifestation of evil all around us can prompt people to search for a deeper meaning to life, can help them to find the church, to find Christ, to find God. But I just give a caveat against, don't go searching for evil if you don't have to, if you're not confronted by it, if it doesn't come knocking on your door. Don't go looking into Kabbalah, except maybe superficially. I've scratched the surface with it, and it is horrible. They're false accounts of what happened before creation. It's so blasphemous, and it's clearly from the devil. There's more about it in this book. I might say more about that in future videos. Both Peterson and Brand recognized that there's something about lowliness, about humility, where truth is found, answers are found, and where we will find hope. We do not have to fear the mighty. This Our Lady has sung about in her Magnificat. She was right 2,000 years ago, and she's been right every single day ever since. And it's building up to a wonderful finale.
In the Bethlehem, the king will come, not in the palaces of your life or in the opulence of your life, but when you're down among the animals in the manger, this is where the king will be born. This is where the chosen one will be found.
Right.
Oh man, I've got so many questions.
The lowly.
Yeah, the lowly. I want to say that at the beginning of this, I was talking about the sort of like, the daring to pose the sort of current Middle Eastern conflict as potentially a symbolic event, and perhaps as a precursor to like that sort of consistent and profound Old Testament idea, the messianic event. And if indeed Christianity offers anything new, as you said, it's the literal embodiment of that prophecy found notably in Isaiah, but I'm sure elsewhere.
Yes, the conflicts and people talking about a World War III, this is absolutely about false messianism. And the antidote to it is absolutely Jesus Christ, born in Bethlehem. Zionism is the false narrative that is sucking in a lot of Protestants, and even Catholics are going wobbly on it. Don't fall for it. Russell Brand talks about denial of nature. This we see in transgender operations on children. One of the most disgusting things that's happening on this planet. This is denial of nature.
That synchronicity ultimately becomes the observed lack of distinction, the porousness between the inner and outer worlds. That if indeed there will be a symbolic end time, a rapture, an apocalypse, an Armageddon, the thing that it feels sometimes that I've been personally facing and perhaps we're globally being confronted with right now live on your TV sets, is it possible that we are sort of experiencing some aperture, some birth, or could it be, and is part of our shared goal here, to discuss the potential of a return of Christ that might not be personal, and God knows I don't know what the Christians mean by it, but a kind of an awakening within us all that acknowledges that what we have to recognize is that there is an overarching ideology around technology, progressivism, materialism, and individualism, and that ideology is unitive, darkly unitive. It is a shadow force. It is Satan. It is the idea that the end point of this is one central authority, one central ideology, denial of nature, denial of God, the hedonic and pleasure as a substitute for divine connection, and that only the ultimate sacrifice, the denial of the ego, the ultimate sacrifice, the denial of the self, the small self, is the only key, the only vessel, the only branch that we can offer to some potentially forgiving God. Are we at this point now?
You can feel Russell Brand's approach to truth, that yes, Jesus Christ, it's that simple, who took on flesh from the Virgin Mary, who was born a baby, who died on the cross. He is real, and he will come again. What he said is not an illusion. But the global forces that we feel, yeah, they are liars, and they want to make us all the same, grey uniformity. And it is from Satan, that one central authority he's spoken about. Back in 1922, I think it was Nahum Sokolov who was talking about Jerusalem as the world's capital, to bring peace to the world. He said the League of Nations was a Jewish idea, and that's true. And the United Nations, which succeeded it, is also a Jewish idea. And this one authority, this global presence, is an instrument of Satan. It's also spoken of in the Zohar. The will that cannot be scrutinized, it's irrational, it doesn't make sense, but it promises the world to those who submit to it. Again, there's more in the book, If You Believe Moses, Volume 2. Everything in the world that builds up and is good will point to Jesus Christ. And even evil reveals him by a lack of what we realize we need. What evil offers is a lie that leaves us empty. And the more honestly one will face that, the more one realizes that the only way out of it comes from Jesus Christ, who's really present in the Blessed Sacrament, the Holy Eucharist. And hence the message of sacrifice, the realization that self-sacrifice is necessary, but not by our own strength, but by uniting it with his sacrifice on Calvary, which you do when you receive Holy Communion, if we're doing that with awareness and devotion. Now, to receive Holy Communion worthily, you need to fight against your own sin, using examinations of conscience, confession, and also taking on penance and mortifications. This Jordan Peterson is getting at remotely, without obviously saying exactly what the Catholic Church teaches.
That human beings needed the moral equivalent of war. And you actually see that reflected in certain streams of Islamic thought that call for the jihad that's an internal jihad rather than an external war. Now, I would say that Jung proclaimed that any state of inner contradiction that wasn't played out and faced psychologically would be made manifest in the world as fate, right? Which means that those things that you choose to ignore will rise up and hit you in the face. Well, that's what's happening as we descend into this war. Like, this war is a false adventure, right? It's an externalization of the apocalypse. That's a good way of thinking about it. And it's something that should occur within. And if that war occurs within, it doesn't have to occur in the world.
This is true. To see what is happening in Israel as a kind of a warning of the apocalypse. I mean, I don't think it's round the corner. There is a bit of history to run yet. But that is a projection of what's happening in the souls of certain people who we all have our responsibility and our part to play in this. I'll come to that later. But the greatest crisis in any soul is in a Jew who rejects Jesus Christ, because we're all called by Jesus Christ, but the Jews were given a long preparation and a very specific calling. For them to reject him and that to build up for 2,000 years, when it's really obvious that Jesus is the Messiah, it's becoming more and more obvious. That creates a terrible tension in the soul, and it's being projected outwards with more and more effect as they search to make real the alternative story that anything else can be the Messiah than Jesus. So now the story is that Israel itself is the Messiah come to save the world. And just look how wrong that's going. Now, some people dismiss all this and say you're trying to blame the Jews for everything. That is so far from the truth. It's pathetic. We're all responsible for our own life and our own salvation. In Judgment Day, you can't point to someone else and say it's their fault, they did this, they did that. What's happening with the Jews is they are leading the world in false messianism. That's true. They're trying to present a global story that isn't Jesus. And if we get sucked into that, if we follow that through our lifestyle or our conversations or philosophy or who we work for, that's our responsibility. Why have we followed this lie? The Jews by rejecting Jesus and yet believing there's a Messiah, which not everyone has those two thoughts, that there is a Messiah and it's not Jesus. But once they put out this idea of we need a global order for heaven on earth, which is what Zinzendorf and Swedenborg and William Blake were searching for. And it's what all the social justice warriors are searching for. And the Kabbalists with very dark magic. If you fall for that, or if you support the beast through getting into debt unnecessarily, because the beast lives off global debt, or if one falls for the lies about excess leading to wisdom, then that's one's own responsibility. So in the book, I tried to explain how Jews themselves have said how their philosophy gave shape to the Protestant sects, to the Reformation, and they're proud of it. But on Judgment Day, it will be Englishmen who will have to answer for Anglicanism, and Germans for Lutheranism, and the Scots for Presbyterianism. And each Catholic, every one of us, we have to answer for our own sins. You can't blame the Jews. So certainly this isn't an attempt to blame them for everything, but it is to recognize that they're the ones coming up with the big idea that it's the alternative to Jesus and that is sucking in the whole world and that it's showing its demonic face in the last 3 years like never before.
And you might say, well, how do you find as much adventure in your own life as you would find in a war? And the answer is you conduct a sufficient war internally. You know, and that means and this is, I would say, in many ways, this is the central message of a psychologized Judeo-Christianity. It's like the fundamental cosmic battle between good and evil is fought in the soul. And I think that's true. And if it isn't fought in the soul, it will be fought out in the world.
There he said it all very well, apart from one point. There is no such thing as Judeo-Christian. That is an oxymoron. Those two systems are in absolute contradiction on the most important question. Whatever you might say they agree on about certain things of the Old Testament, all that fades into insignificance compared to how we react to the crucifixion. So yes, unless we're willing to wage war against evil in our soul and come to the truth and beg Jesus for mercy and grace and help, then we will see wars proliferate in the world and eventually engulf it all. Except, I believe, it will be Jesus' love through Our Lady's Immaculate Heart, which is going to engulf the world.
And so you call upon people to fight it out in their soul, but I don't think there's any difference between that, by the way, and the notion that you're to hoist the cross of mortality and malevolence on your own shoulders. It's the same thing. If you're going to have an internal struggle that's as intense as an external war would be, as a substitute for that war, then that's going to be, well, in many ways, as brutal as the war. And that's a hell of a thing to ask people to do. But like with many properly moral choices, the only thing that worse than doing it is what happens if you don't do it.
It's absolutely true. The hardest fight in the world is to fight your own sin, but it's the one fight that you have to do, or nothing else you do is going to count or help. And again, thanks be to God, he gives us the sacraments to do this. He gives us the teaching. Take up your cross. Jesus knows what is needful for every single soul. Here's something wonderful about this whole thing. If anyone who has deep inner problems, if they're not going to deal with them, they are going to project them outward. How do we handle that? If we react in a intolerant, impatient, cruel way without love, then their problems are just going to go on and on from generation to generation until someone faces up to it. You can, by taking the pain that people project out, by handling that well, you're helping to redeem the world, except none of us are supermen. We can't really do that by our own strength. If you think when you're going to marry someone that by loving them you can make them a better person, it's not going to work. You could take decades to find that out. You need to love someone that you marry and be willing to bear their burdens for a long, long time. It's the grace of God that will make them a better person. Or if you're living with someone with a personality disorder, you can't fix them by being good. More, you need to put boundaries where you don't let them push you about. But we do have only one planet, and if megalomaniacs and psychopaths are projecting their pain outward because they won't deal with it, I'm not saying that we absorb this like a sponge. We have to try and set those boundaries where we don't follow them, we don't give them power. But in as much as people are searching for truth, searching for God, then by living with patience and charity, which Jesus gives to you, you're helping to diffuse those problems so that that other person who's projecting out will find peace themselves and find Christ themselves. Most of us are all projecting out some of this, especially some times of the day or some times of the year. We might have good patches, bad patches. And thanks be to God for the holy souls out there who are willing to be mortified and to bear our burdens so that we can wake up the next day and have another chance to ask God for his help.
It's hard, Jordan, to imagine that now that we've been sort of plumped and fatted and made prisoners of comfort, that en masse there could be the type of awakening required for people to undergo the true jihad, the true apocalypse, the true inner revelation that is required for us to, as a planet, abstain from war. How do we awaken the sort of the willingness to, to pick up the sword or pick up the cross or pick up whatever it is?
Yeah, it's the cross we need to pick up. And so the church would have us fast every Friday and for Lent and even for Advent, and to regularly make mortifications so that we're not these hedonistic couch potatoes who can be manipulated by the globalists. And it's never too late to return to this. But we have to be clear, there is only one way. It is Jesus Christ, nothing less. Only he bridges heaven and earth. He who came down and ascended back to heaven to take us with him if we will follow, if we will take up our cross. There's some very good news. Tammy Peterson, the wife of Jordan Peterson, is becoming Catholic to enter into the church next Easter. Whoever searches for the truth and wants it more than anything will find a way. Please say a prayer for Russell Brand and for Jordan Peterson. I think they get a lot of comments from Christians. If Catholics will comment in a rational and charitable way, this has a wonderful cumulative effect on people. God bless you all.